But like I said, comment any comments that you have in the comments below. It helps boost the algorithm, boost us in the algorithm. I don't know how to say this stuff. I'm not good at shilling for myself. But, definitely hit the like button and comment any questions that you have in the chat, and we will get to it. Tonight is a stream that I've been wanting to do for a while. What's up, Ethan? Thank you for... We all hear you. Good. This is a stream that I've been wanting to do for a while. It is about a talk that Alex O'Connor gave titled "Why I Don't Believe." This is why I don't believe in God, and this is the talk that we're going to be going over, and it is very interesting. I think that it's very important to have these types of discussions. And Alex O'Connor is a very good person, I think, to be engaging in this type of discussion, because I genuinely do believe he's genuine. And that is an important thing. If somebody is not being genuine, then you can't engage with them genuinely. And so therefore you shouldn't engage with them at all. So it's good to have somebody like that involved in this discussion who would describe themselves as an atheist. And so what I want to do tonight is I want to go over his main arguments, and I think that there's some important ones to discuss. And I also want to discuss why atheism is impossible. And this is not the same statement that many people make when they say things like that, when they say atheism is impossible. And, I've seen Alex O'Connor criticize Jordan Peterson before for saying you can't be an atheist because if you look at a painting and you feel something, then you're not an atheist. And I actually think that it's, I understand where Alex is coming from on that, but that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about when I say atheism is impossible is that given the main premise that we're going to be deconstructing of Alex's argument tonight, you cannot... that atheism, meaning the lack of any belief about the sentience of existence, meaning God, is an impossible non-position to hold. You can't have a non-position about existence in general. So we're going to talk about what that means, because it is important, because atheism really means two different things. For one, it really means anti-theism. And I say this as somebody who was a self-described atheist for 24 years of my life before having a theophany. And for many reasons, but mainly due to exploring science even more deeply. And specifically the science of sentience. And this led me to realize that you could not hold a non-position, which makes perfect sense, about existence itself, because everybody interacts with existence. So we're going to get into that a bit more, and I'll explain it if it doesn't make sense. Don't worry, it will, hopefully. But Alex O'Connor is very interesting. I really like listening to his discussions, and he... went by, I think, originally Cosmic Skeptic. This is his website, Cosmic Skeptic. And says here that question everything. That's what I grew up being told. My entire life was question everything. And he is the founder of the Cosmic Skeptic YouTube channel. Okay, so it used to be called the Cosmic Skeptic. Platforms dedicated to the publication of philosophical ideas and debates in an accessible format. He is a graduate of philosophy and theology from St. John's College, Oxford University. Alex is an international public speaker and debater, having delivered addresses across multiple continents. Yeah, he's talked to a lot of people. And he does a good job at laying out his arguments. And I think that he has engaged with the wrong people on this stuff. And to be quite honest, and even though you would think that he's engaging with the right people, because he's engaging with all kinds of people, I don't think he's engaging with the right people given his arguments. So we're going to specifically address those. tonight. So, without further ado, let's get into this. If you are just tuning in now, please hit the like button. It really helps fuel the algorithm. Comment in the chat. Thank you, Paulina, to my wonderful wife, for giving me a sound check. Okay, so first clip. Very good one. Okay.
Of course, this is an opening statement, so I won't.
Okay.
To the arguments you just heard just yet. Instead, I want to make my own case that upon an honest analysis of the world we find ourselves in, it should compel us to dismiss the hypothesis of a supernatural creator. I will not be asking you to look in ancient scripture, nor to the beginning of the universe, nor indeed down a microscope, instead just to your direct experience of the world and facts about the lives of people within it. I will, however, indulge in a brief biblical recital, because I want to begin with a book.
Okay, so first, we're going to get to what he's about to say because it's very important. But what I want to say is that this is very important, and I actually agree with him, is that you have to look to your own experience whenever you are trying to understand anything. And as my work with sentient singularity theory has, highlights quite a bit, and if you're familiar with my channel, then you know this. If you're going to analyze anything, if you're going to think about anything, you must prioritize first-hand information above second-hand information. If you prioritize second-hand information above first-hand information, you have stopped thinking. Okay? And so this is a big problem in our society today, as I've gotten into before, and I won't get into too much now. But like I just said, if you prioritize second-hand information above first-hand information, you have stopped thinking. Now, one of the things, though, that I want to state when it comes to addressing this first statement that he makes, which he hasn't even really made any kind of argument yet, other than just explaining where he's coming from. He goes on to read a passage of scripture, but this is kind of an important thing in and of itself, is that he's stating how you should look at this, even though he then goes on to read scripture. But what he states, the passage that he references in scripture, is actually a pretty good one. And so let's listen to it, and then we will get to hold
on. From the book of Psalms. So if you could all turn to Psalm 139, unless, of course, you've already committed this famous passage to memory. Verse 7 onwards reads, "Where can I go from your presence? Or where can I flee from your spirit? If I ascend to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths of the Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall guide me, and your right hand shall hold me fast." This poem in its entirety is given by the NRSV a title, "The Inescapable God." It's a message of bold reassurance to the believer, reminding them that since God is present everywhere, pervading every inch of our universe, he is, in the happiest sense possible, inescapable. But my first argument, and it's going to be...
Okay, there we go. So this is an important thing, because when he's giving this first statement that he's assuming about God, which is true about God, is that God is everywhere that you look. And what this means is that we are presented with a fish in water situation, a fish looking for water. And it's in that you will see God everywhere that you look. And so, but first we need to figure out, what is the definition of God? And this is why it's kind of difficult to know exactly what order to address everything in, because when you're talking about God, everything kind of is simultaneous. And so every argument that I'm going to make pertains to every argument that he makes in this, which makes this a bit difficult to know exactly when the best point in time is to present what I'm trying to say. But just bear with me on this, and hopefully it comes out coherently. But we're looking for something that's everywhere. And that, though, is, while I agree with the assumption, it's not best to, if you're going to say we have to look to our own experience to figure out whether or not God exists, you can't start with Scripture, even though I would argue that that's probably the best passage of Scripture to start with if you're going to start with a passage of Scripture to discuss the existence and definition of God. But the point is that if we assume, though, what he is stating about this ever-present, inescapable God is true, which I think is true to say, then what this means is that if you don't see God, then maybe your definition of God is not actually correct. And he goes on in this discussion to make certain statements about God that we're going to address, but it's very important. But that's one of the things that I want to state first, is that if you don't see God, and God is everywhere, it means that your definition of God is incorrect. And Curt Jaimungal presented this statement of mine on when he went on with Jordan Peterson, which I will link below. I have not, but I want to show that clip because it's important to just see at the end what Jordan Peterson kind of says about what this implies. It's about the hiddenness of God.
Far from being unable to escape God, there is a very real contingent of non-believers, and I would count myself among their number, who are unable by any means to discover him, who seek and do not find, who knock and receive, as it were, no answer. This strange phenomenon is known as the problem of divine hiddenness. If there is a God, then simply, why is he hidden from so many of us so much of the time? If theism is to offer a sufficient account of reality, then it must offer an account of what J.L. Schellenberg has famously labelled non-resistant non-belief, which he distinguishes from resistant non-belief. It's sometimes said by a theist who wishes to explain the problem of divine hiddenness that people simply disbelieve through their own fault. They're too stubborn. They're purposefully blinding themselves to the evidence because they don't want it to be true. They're not approaching the arguments honestly with an open heart, and that if they would only do this, then God would surely reveal himself. Such a person would be what Schellenberg calls a resistant non-believer. He disbelieves, in some sense, because he actively resists it. For what it's worth, I do think that such people exist. I think many such people exist. There are people who come to this debate with their minds already made up. There are people who want it not to be true, that God exists, and in fact wouldn't submit to that truth even if it were true. There was a recent poll run by the Atheist Experience YouTube channel, which I know, Jonathan, you're a fan of, which asked, if there was a God, would you worship it? To which an astonishing 85% of respondents said that they would not. There are, however, also people who disbelieve in God, not out of resistance or stubbornness or a hardened heart, but rather due to sheer lack of conviction. Indeed, many such people actively want to be convinced of God's existence and would jump at the chance of entering into a relationship with him if they thought that he did. But no matter how hard they search, they simply find no answer forthcoming from the heavens, and this is the non-resistant non-believer. Formally, then, Schellenberg's problem of divine hiddenness can be...
Okay, so this is important because this leads to what I was going to share before, which is just that this quote that I've stated again and again and again, which is that, and this is coming from my own personal experience, being somebody who self-described as an atheist, turned theist. If you assume the first premise that he kind of gives where he quotes Psalms, that God is everywhere, God is inescapable, that means that if you don't see him, your concept of God, your conception of God is false. You have to assume that. And this is where I think people kind of start to go wrong with this. And I think that a lot of this has to do with just the way that religion is kind of taught. And it's taught in multiple different ways, but some ways work for some and not for others. And one of the things that is important to me always is exactly what is stated on Alex's website, which is to question everything. And but if you are that type of person, then kind of emotional arguments for God's existence are probably not going to cut it, even if they do move you. And so here.
So here's one of this is something I heard from Tyler Goldstein, who has his own theory of everything. He said, ordinarily, here's how it works. We have a definition, and then we look for evidence, and then dismiss what we've just defined if we don't find the evidence. He said, perhaps what we should do when it comes to God is instead of looking for God and then not finding it and then saying God doesn't exist, you use the fact that you didn't find evidence of God as an indication that you should alter your definition of God.
Yeah, well, that's sure. That's a perfectly reasonable approach to that problem.
Right. Obviously, However,
that's a really good observation. Right. Yeah, it shows you how tricky questions like that are, right? It's like, well, maybe you're looking in the wrong place. Maybe you formulated your search incorrectly. Like, you don't know. Because let's say you're aiming at the highest reality, right? It's like you're aiming at the highest reality. Well, how do you know you have the question formulated properly? Because if you did, well, you'd have already found it.
Exactly. And this is what I mean is, if God is inescapable, if you formulated your questions correctly about God, then you would see him. You would see evidence of him, at least. You might not get a direct, face-to-face communication or conversation, but you would see evidence as to why God existed. And, I stated this in my Theories of Everything, the how-to guide video that was part of the Pace 1 competition for the Theories of Everything channel. And I stated that if you're going to look at the highest reality, if you're going to look at the most fundamental reality, which is, the highest is the most fundamental, there's no differentiation in that question, I guess, then you have to ask yourself, what is the truest thing that I know? That is what you have to ask yourself. It is the first question of first principles. It's the first principle has to be the answer to that question. What is the truest thing that I know? And the answer to that is the same as for everyone, which is I am. That means that sentience is what we understand most truly to exist about the nature of reality. And the next thing that you can kind of ask about is what is about the nature of, you've asked about the nature of existence, is what is the truest thing that I know, but when you're looking at the structure of existence, you just look at the definition of existence itself, which is that it is all-encompassing, meaning it is one. There's one existence. So if we want to ask what is the structure of existence, it is oneness, most fundamentally. And what is the nature of existence, most truly, that we know? You can't even look at a book and be like, this book, what is the nature of that book? Because you're looking at it through the lens of a more fundamental understanding, which is the existence of yourself. Yourself and your existence is deterministic in terms of your understanding of the existence of that book. It precedes it. So you have to look more fundamentally at you and your existence and the nature of that existence, which is sentience. And the structure of existence, by definition, is oneness, because it is all-encompassing. So what do we know about the nature and structure of existence, or what should we assume? What do we have to assume? Because remember, You must prioritize first-hand information above second-hand information always. And you could say, well, it's my first-hand experience that this is not sentient. But that isn't as fundamental as your first-hand experience of the nature of your existence. So you have to assume that existence is one and existence is sentient. You have to. There's no way around this. And if you asked what the definition of God is, God must be, if you break this down, this question from a first principles understanding, you can't look to scripture. You can't look to somebody else's opinion because you'll get it wrong, potentially. Potentially not, but potentially you will. But if you break down what God is, it is that existence is a someone. And that the universe or that multiplicity of sentience is due to an initial singularity of sentience, creating additional sentient singularities within itself. So that is the definition of God, is that it is the initial sentience. It is the sentience of existence itself. It's the fundamental sentience. It's the fundamental sentient being that precedes all things and everyone else. That is fundamentally what God has to be defined as. Yeah, you can get into, this scripture and that scripture, but if you want to understand this, you have to start from first principles. And that is what happens when you start from first principles, is you realize that you must assume that existence is one, and that existence by nature is sentient. By structure, it is one. And from that definition, then you can move to look to see, do you see evidence of this? But you can't just look at what someone's opinion of God is, which might be true and might not, and then look for evidence of that. And if you don't see it, dismiss the existence of God if you're going to look at this honestly. You can't take your own preconception of God if you don't see him and look for evidence and not find it and then dismiss the existence of God entirely. When I first started down this journey of sentient singularity theory, before it was sentient singularity theory, I was just trying to map thinking. And what thinking starts with is taking the default status of your mind and assuming the opposite is true and looking for evidence of it. So if the default status of you in thinking about anything but in this case God, is that God doesn't exist. You have to assume the opposite is true. Assume God exists and look for evidence of him. But here's the thing. If you don't see evidence of him, but you're still assuming that he exists, that means that you have to alter your definition of God because it might be wrong. And people don't do that part of this. And that's the problem with a lot of people's attempts at figuring this out. And it is an honest misstep. It was my honest misstep. I remember when I was 13 years old, and it was before my bar mitzvah, and my rabbi said to me, Tyler, what do you think about, God and religion and everything? And I was like, I don't believe in God, is what I told him. And he said, why not? And I said, because they're, fossils exist and they're way older than, 5,000 something years old. And so, and I know that, but, and how well do I know that is, it's secondhand information, but that doesn't mean it's false. It just means it's secondhand information. And I was like, so therefore no God. And so there's so many problems with that because I'm taking someone else's definition of God, essentially, that's been presented to me as the definition, meaning that he created the world 7 days ago, essentially, or not 7 days ago, but in 7 days, and then 5,000 something years on top of that. And so, and I was like, I know that things are older than 6,000 years. So therefore no God. There's so many layers built on top of that of secondhand assumptions. Not saying that they're wrong, but they're still secondhand assumptions. And I had never, from a first principles standpoint, examined the definition of God. And that's an important thing to do. And it's also important to examine what it means to think about something. Because there's only one way to think. It is a specific structure/process. And you have to follow it, or else you're going to be misled. Even if you end up with the right answer, it might be for the wrong reasons. That's not a good thing either, because you didn't actually end up with the right answer. And yeah, so next clip is very interesting as well. If we're going to talk about kind of not emotional arguments, but an argument that is emotional, but it isn't an emotion-based argument. I think it's a wonderful one, and this one's probably mainly for the theists, but Curt Jaimungal said something so profound and in my mind that I want to present this at least for the theists, but in a moment.
Far from being unable to escape God, there is a very real contingent of non-believers, and I would count myself among their number, who are unable by any means to discover him, who seek and do not find, who knock and receive, as it were, no answer. This strange phenomenon is known as the problem of divine hiddenness. If there is a God, then simply, why is he hidden from so many of us so much of the time? If theism is to offer a sufficient account of reality, then it must offer an account of what J.L. Schellenberg has famously labelled non-resistant non-belief, which he distinguishes from resistant non-belief. It's sometimes said by a theist who wishes to explain the problem of divine hiddenness that people simply disbelieve through their own fault. They're too stubborn. They're purposefully blinding themselves to the evidence because they don't want it to be true. They're not approaching the arguments honestly with an open heart, and that if they would only do this, then God would surely reveal himself. Such a person would be what Schellenberg calls a resistant non-believer. He disbelieves, in some sense, because he actively resists it. For what it's worth, I do think that such people exist. I think many such people exist. There are people who come to this debate with their minds already made up. There are people who want it not to be true, that God exists, and in fact wouldn't submit to that truth even if it were true. There was a recent poll run by the Atheist Experience YouTube channel, which I know, Jonathan, you're a fan of, which asked, if there was a God, would you worship it? To which an astonishing 85% of respondents said that they would not. There are, however, also...
Okay, for one, I just wanted to show that, because that is astounding, but it's also not surprising at all. That the atheist channel is 85% of them are saying that they would not worship a God even if one existed. This also supports my idea that there is no such thing, that atheism is impossible. Having atheism meaning a lack of belief. You know, not Sean Carroll, but probably Sean Carroll too. But Sam Harris says this. He's like, atheism isn't the disbelief in God. It is the lack of an opinion about it. You can be agnostic, which is the same thing as being agnostic, by the way, which you can't be agnostic about God. You can be agnostic about Bigfoot if you don't research Bigfoot. If you research Bigfoot enough, though, eventually you're going to have an opinion about Bigfoot. You can be anti-Bigfoot's existence or pro-Bigfoot's existence, but eventually you can't be agnostic anymore. But existence is something that we interact with every day. And whether you believe that existence is a sentient being or not, that you're within, or whether or not that existence is not sentient, is something that you don't have a luxury, or not even a luxury, you don't have the possibility of not having an opinion on. You might be a more confident theist, or a less confident theist, or a more confident anti-theist, or less confident anti-theist, but you can't be an atheist, meaning having a lack of an opinion. And if we go to the definition of atheism, it means this is interesting. It says here, the disbelief or lack of a belief in the existence of God. It's like, this can't even get it right because they're giving two different definitions. It's like, you can't have that. That's why this is a problem. And I can tell you from when I was a self-described atheist, I really was an anti-theist. I disbelieved in God. I disbelieved. I didn't have no opinion. And I think that people that claim to be agnostic are just not being openly honest. I think that if they were really vulnerable and you pushed them and they were willing to admit what's deep in their mind or heart, they would say that they leaned one way or the other. That doesn't mean they have to be confident about it, but they would certainly lean one way or the other. And I think that at that point, you're not really an agnostic. But this was Curt's argument that I wanted to get to about the hiddenness of God. And I thought that this was beautiful. Like, really, it, in Judaism and in many religions, there is charity or tithing or tzedakah in Hebrew, and the highest form of it is always giving anonymously. And so that is kind of the background of this statement that he made. This is mainly for the theists, but maybe it will register with you as an atheist, an anti-theist. Sorry.
Gift giving is anonymous.
Yes.
So that to me seems, it doesn't seem self-evident, but it seems plausible at least. And there's almost all the religions tend to agree on that.
Totally.
So maybe, you know how there are proofs of God and then there are problems. I think you can probably prove God to yourself personally. But I think the reason there doesn't exist a proof of God is that existence itself is such a gift. Like, this is a gift. This is a gift. Talking to you is a gift. This is a gift. Just breathing is a gift. Somehow even suffering is a gift, which is so controversial. Someone said that the God wouldn't sentence the devil to die for eternity because that's a gift. Even being alive and suffering is more of a gift than not existing.
I love that.
So somehow existence itself is a gift, and the greatest gift of all is given anonymously. So God by nature has designed this such that you cannot prove he did it, because if you prove he did it, that's like finding, you donated and you're like, I did it anonymously, but you find the receipt somewhere. So by its nature, you have to come to the conclusion, because it's such a gift, it's the greatest gift. I gave it to you anonymously. You can curse my name and I will still give you life.
That's amazing.
I will still give Sam Harris the best life.
I was just thinking that when you said that.
Even if he curses me and gets many people riled up and causes suffering, I'm sorry, you're still given existence. And I will not come down from the clouds and say and announce myself. And even that you can doubt. So no matter what, I will give you the gift of doubting too.
Guys, that is amazing. That's amazing. It's funny because Curt has stated before that, he thought that my statement about like the definition of God was profound. And it's funny because I think this is so profound. Like this statement that he's now made. It's one of the most profound statements I've ever heard. It's a totally unique statement as far as I'm concerned about the nature of God's hiddenness. And I will say, God is not hidden from me at this point in my life. That doesn't mean he's, God doesn't give you the silent treatment sometimes. God definitely gives you the silent treatment sometimes. But still, God certainly was hidden from me prior to, experiences that I had had. And I heard him recently make this argument on his interview that he gave. Is him being interviewed by Jesse Michels, and I'm going to link the link below. I have not yet, but I will do that after this is posted. It's a very good interview. I thought about even doing a stream about it, but this was the one thing that I mainly wanted to reference. And so I thought this was a good stream to bring it up in, better than just even doing an entire stream about that interview. I highly encourage you to just go watch that interview. I will link it below. But that was just an outstanding argument, in my opinion, because we're talking about a sentient someone. And that's something that you have to remember. So when you're thinking about what is the evidence for God, you can't think about this just in terms of it not being a sentient being who can't make any choices. It is a sentient being that can make choices. And I thought that was, just an incredible argument. But also when we bring it back to what I was saying about you have to, if you don't see evidence of God, and God is truly inescapable, then, which he would be by logic, it's not even just that you can see that argument in the scripture in the Psalms. If God is sentient existence and you are within that being, then God is inescapable in every way. And so this comes back to the whole statement that I had made, though, of like, you have to alter your definition of God. And if your definition of God is wrong, then you definitely won't see him around. And if you do see him around, then, and your definition is wrong, then you think that you see God, but you don't actually see God. You're seeing something else that you think is God, but it's not God. But you would not, that would be probably pretty rare. You'd probably, I would think, just because why would God want that to happen where you're just mistaken about what is God and what is not? I think that it would be pretty obvious what is that God versus someone else, whatever that means. And well, we won't get into that in the stream, but still, and that that is actually like an entire stream that we could get into, but we're not on this one. But my point is that you have to have the correct definition, and there's also a sentient aspect to this where God's making choices, and it is a gift to be here if you are here intentionally, because God partitioned a part of his sentience off specifically so that you could exist, which my work suggests he has to choose to do that. That's against the nature of oneness, which is, that would be the default nature, would be oneness. That means you have to go against your nature in order to have multiplicity of sentience. That means it's a choice for God to make you. Then there is going to be elements of that being in the context of this is a gift. That doesn't mean he doesn't have his own reasons for doing it that are selfish too. I think he does. But that doesn't mean that it's also not a gift. Of course it is. If it's an intentional act to create you, and it takes partitioning a portion of him, then it is a gift for sure. And I thought that Curt's statement is profound. I've never heard that. I'm not saying he's the first person to come up with it. I don't know if I'm the first person to come up with my statement about, the definition of God, but I've never heard anybody else say that, and I've never heard anybody else say what Curt has said. But I thought that was profound. So let's get into another clip by Alex. He's talking about the Schellenberger's argument for divine hiddenness against God's existence. And this I thought was fascinating in many ways, but we're going to take a look at it. I don't even know who Schellenberger is, to be quite honest. But we will look it up.
Formally,
this is Schellenberger's argument against God's existence.
Schellenberg's problem of divine hiddenness can be stated as follows. Premise
I guess it's Schellenberg. Sorry about that.
If there is a God, he is perfectly loving, something I'm pretty sure Jonathan agrees with. Premise 2. If a perfectly loving God exists, non-resistant non-belief does not occur. Premise 3. Non-resistant non-belief does occur. 4. Therefore, no perfectly loving God exists, and the conclusion from the first premise is that therefore there is no God. A loving God, like the Christian God, would surely not refuse any willing person from developing a relationship with him, and so if somebody is truly non-resistant and open to receiving God's grace, we should expect them to receive it. Thus, Schellenberg's assertion that if God exists, then non-resistant non-belief does not exist. The question, then, is there such a thing as non-resistant non-belief, a non-resistant non-believer? To which all I can really say is, nice to meet you. The last time I debated Jonathan a number of years.
Okay, so we're going to get to that in a minute. But I wanted to state that something that I had missed is that regarding Curt's argument about you can't prove God's existence, but you can prove it to yourself. You know, I thought about that and I was like, okay, but I think that my argument about sentience being the truest thing that we can know and existence being definition 1, and if God is sentient, existence as a singular sentient being, then that seems like a proof of God's, like a philosophical proof of God's existence. But then I realized that you can't actually prove that. Okay, that the truest thing that I can know is that I am. Okay. So even still, it's not the truest thing necessarily. It's just the truest thing that I can know. But you still have to assume it, below everything else that you construct about the world. So you really can only prove technically to yourself about that existence is sentient and existence is one. But it's that everybody seems to inevitably be required to have the same answer to this, but it's still from your first person perspective that this has to be done. And it's not that my argument is that you must assume that this is the case because it's based on the truest thing that you can know. So what I'm trying to get at is that it seems like Curt is right, even though it seems like there is that the argument that you can prove about the existence of God is also universal, but it's universally first person, which is just interesting. It's like not like anything else I've ever seen, and it's not like it's like a mathematical proof that must start with your first person, and so it's like a universal proof, but it's not. But it must start from a first person investigation. You can't just read the equation. You have to put yourself into the equation, if that makes any sense. It's very interesting. I don't have the right words for it right now. I'm trying to come up with the right words for it, but what Curt said is profound, and yeah, I don't know. I keep thinking about it, and eventually I hope I find the right words, but yeah. Anyways. But let me see here. Schellenberg definition. Let's find out who Schellenberg is. Yeah, okay, Schellenberg, not Schellenberger. I don't know why I said that, but who? It doesn't. Premise 1: if non-belief exists, which resistant non-belief is the specific context that Alex gives, then it's God does not exist. Okay, well, basically this is it right here. If non-belief exists, then probably God does not. Non-belief probably exists, therefore God probably does not exist. And I kind of agree with this, actually, but here's the thing, and here's the catch. Non-belief depends on your definition of God. Right? This is why this argument can't be used. Is that the God that Alex doesn't see is not the God that I do. Okay? The God he doesn't see is also the God I don't see, because it's not the God that is. Now, the details of where the difference in that is, I'd have to get into a discussion probably with Alex about it. But they matter dramatically. But it seems like he's basing this entire debate about this entire argument on the definition of, in his mind, of what God, of who God would be, or what God would be. And it's defined by an all-loving God. What does that mean? What does it mean for an all-loving God to exist? Because that's quite a complicated question, you know, and it rides your definition. How do you know what it means to be all-loving if you're not God? That's what I want to know too. Like, how do you know? Because we all experience things that we think are that we dislike and don't enjoy and find, you know, annoying and painful and heartbreaking and agonizing. And yet there are theists and there are anti-theists. And so all loving means something different for each one of those. And I think that one of them is making the assumption, and the other one is about, let me say this. People ask me about God all the time, like, and they say faith, you know. I don't have faith in God's existence. I know God exists. For multiple reasons, I know God exists. Personal experiences that I've gotten into on this channel before that I probably won't tonight because it's just too long. But maybe I will. We'll see. I got into it, I think, in the last stream that I did. But I think I did get into it. But also, before that, logic. Before I had any experiences with God, I had a logical construction of God for the first time in my life. And then I had personal experiences. But I didn't before that. God didn't come down from the heavens before I had any conclusion of his existence. And I'm not saying that he can't do that. But I am going to say maybe he wouldn't want to. I don't know. I'm not God. If you do assume, you know, it's funny because people say, if an all-loving God exists, then how come this happens? And how come this happens? And how come I don't see him? And how come you don't see him or he doesn't see him? It's like, God, if God exists, is beyond you in his perspective. He is. So his perception of what it would mean to be all loving in a specific circumstance is different than yours. But also, if your definition of God is incorrect, then you won't be able to see him anyways, even while he's loving you. You won't. There's no way around that. That has to do with thought and logic. It doesn't have to do with God. You know? It's like if you don't know what the color red looks like and you walk around and there's red all around you and you see it, but you don't know that that's what red is, and people ask you, what, you know, do you see red in your life? And you're like, no, I don't see any red. It's like, but your concept of red was wrong. You did see the red. You just didn't know that it was red. That happens with God. You have to assume. If you assume God exists, then you have to assume that happens. And that's more fundamental than anything. And it's a logical problem. It's not an emotional one. But there is I don't even want to say emotional versus logical problems. I don't even think that that's the right way to break it down. But there's certainly problems that invoke emotion, even if they're not emotional problems. And I think that it's, I think that I got to think more about how is best way to discuss that. But if your concept of God is wrong, you will not see him, even though he's in front of your face. And the thing is that you have to assume that the nature of existence is sentience. You have to. The truest thing that you know is I am. Not me, but you. The truest thing that you know is you are. That means that the truest thing that you know about the nature of existence is that it is sentient. And existence, by definition, is everything, and therefore one. So, logically, existence is a singular sentience. Right? I've never heard an argument against that. If you know of one, please put it in the comments. Chris brings a sword. God cannot give you free will unless he makes himself invisible to you. I don't even know if that's true. I think that you have free will even when he's visible to you. I think that there's so much more to that. I do believe that God gives you freedom of will, which is the ability to make choices against your nature. That's what freedom of will is. Or freedom of choices, independent of your nature. Then life is a test to see if you will use your free will to seek him or follow him on your own path. I don't even know how true that is. Maybe it's true, but I don't know. Life is a lot of things. It's partially a bunch of tests, for sure. But is it more than that? I think so. But, I don't know if it's even fair to say that that's what life is, even if it's not, even though I think that it is part of life. Atheism is a vincible, not invincible ignorance. It is conquerable with knowledge. I think it's conquerable with wisdom. And the difference between wisdom and knowledge is first-person understanding. That's what the difference is. First-person understanding. Faith and knowledge are inseparable. Two sides of one coin. Faith and wisdom, I think, in some ways. So, and this is what I was going to get at, is I don't have faith in God's existence. I am aware of God's existence. But I have faith in God's assistance. And maybe he doesn't want to help me. Maybe he does. He's a sentient sovereign being. He can make choices. But I have to have faith in his assistance. And that is where faith comes in. For me, at least. I don't know about for you, but for me, I will say, my faith is in God's assistance, not in his existence. And I think that's an important distinction, I think Ben Shapiro once said this too. I heard him say it many years ago, and I know that Alex has talked to Ben Shapiro about like the utility of religion and things like that, and we're not even going to get into that tonight. We're just going to talk about the nature of existence. But I think I remember Ben was like, I don't believe in God. I know in God, something like that. And I think that's more in alignment with most believers, is they're not just believers. Some people are. And I think that this is or they want to believe, but they don't know. They might think they know, but they don't know. And this gets a little tricky because you can't know who knows and who thinks they know necessarily until you really talk to them and and that's relying on a lot of different prerequisites to get that one sorted out. But I will just say that for me personally, I am aware of God's existence. for logical reasons and from firsthand experience. But also, I have faith in his assistance, but I don't know that he will help me. I pray that he does. It's up to him. And so the same thing goes with, you know, revealing yourself if you're God. You know, and I'll get into it. But when I had my theophany, I had just, and I've talked about this before, I had just come up with a logical structure of the logos of the universe in my mind, and I was thinking about it, and then I had my theophany, and it was absolutely incredible. And I've talked about it before. I don't really want to get too into it, but the lesson that I got from it was that you have to be ready to understand something in order to receive it. You can't just be shown something out of context and actually understand what you're seeing. If I had had the experience that I had in that moment without having come to it on my own, through logic, I would have thought I had a stroke. And instead of understanding what I was going through. And I've said this before, is that context is information. There's no such thing as information outside of context. Context is information. And so if you're not ready to receive God, God would know. If anybody would know, God would know. And why would he show himself to somebody who isn't ready for it? And who are you to say that you're ready for it? And so, you know, when Alex makes these arguments here, he is a non-resistant non-believer. It's not even about being non-resistant. Maybe it's about being not ready because you have a misconception about who God is. And so therefore you couldn't understand God even if he showed up right in front of you. Maybe he has showed up right in front of you and you just didn't see it because you have a misunderstanding. And he knows that. You know, this is why this is the same issue with like suffering. And so Alex gets into two other arguments regarding the problem with theism, and one of them is the existence of suffering, but like menial suffering. And I think that was actually kind of unique and interesting that he kind of used that, like being cold in the rain. We'll get into it, but instead of like, you know, I don't know, like war crimes or something like that, torture. But he gets into like menial suffering, like stubbing your toe and like being cold. And I don't think that that's good arguments against God, even though I think it's a unique argument against God. I haven't heard anybody else make those. Usually they go to like, why do children get cancer? And, you know, there's lots of assumptions that have to be made about God and what it means to be loving if you are God, in order to not to make the argument against God because people suffer who seem innocent. And you know, and that all of those arguments, all of these arguments, including the argument of why don't I see God if I want to see God, all of them are kind of disregarding God's sovereign beingness. If he exists, then all of this is for reasons, not even just one necessarily, but for reasons. And he might have a reason for not showing himself to you. He might have a reason for somebody suffering. It might be that suffering is caused by us and, you know, not by him. It might be that suffering is motivating you towards something, you know, to get out of the rain. And, you know, it might be that you're not ready to receive God right now because you wouldn't understand what you were experiencing even if he did show himself to you. And maybe it's motivating you towards something higher and more important down the road. for you to disbelieve in him right now. Maybe that's part of some plan. You don't know. And that's the thing, is that when we kind of like assume we know better than God whenever we make these arguments of like, well, if God exists, and you know Schellenberg's arguments of if non-belief exists, then probably God doesn't, because why wouldn't he show himself to non-resistant non-believers, which is if non-resistant non-belief exists, and if and since non-resistant non-belief appears to exist because Alex, from his first-person experience, says that he is non-resistant, then therefore God doesn't exist. He's making an assumption of if non-resistant non-belief existed, then therefore God wouldn't exist. Why would you say that? I understand that there's reasons why you would say that, and they appear to be you're hoping for God having certain attributes about his personality, but you're kind of assuming them, not even hoping, but you're assuming. And the thing is, though, is that God is beyond time. So for you to come to awareness of him in the moments of your death may not matter to him versus coming to him at 18, awareness of him at 18 years old. So like he might just be waiting for a better time for you, where you would actually understand what you were going through. And I don't know. I'm not God. I can't tell you why he doesn't seem apparent to you. But I will say that if you don't see God, and you don't see the logic for his existence, then you have a misconception of the definition of God. And even if you think that I'm wrong about that, if you're trying to truly get to the bottom of it, you have to assume I'm right for the sake of argument. Just for the sake of argument. And just for the sake of honest, investigation. And so, there's a lot going on that has to be addressed. I hope that this is coming off as coherent. It's a little tough because so many different things that I want to say are relevant to every argument that he makes. And that's what happens when you're talking about fundamental reality, is it's a lot of things at once. It's not one thing. Or it's multiple things at once. I don't want to say it's a lot. It's multiple. Please hit the like button if you find this valuable. But next, I will say this about Alex. This this statement that he makes, I give him a lot of credit for this.
Such a thing as non-resistant non-belief, a non-resistant non-believer, to which all I can really say is nice to meet you. The last time I debated Jonathan a number of years ago, when I was just a few months out of being a teenager, I said that even if I found Christianity to be true, I still wouldn't want to worship the God that it promotes. I now, since then, have realized how irrational and self-defeating this assertion is, and stand before you today as an example of a non-resistant non-believer. I think it would be great if God existed. I really do. I would absolutely love to escape death. I would relish being the recipient of unconditional love. Less selfishly, I would love to be able to worship that which deserves to be worshipped. I just don't think it's true. Now, try as I might, look where I can, I find no response, no hint, nothing. I don't choose to disbelieve in God any more than I choose to disbelieve in aliens, despite how much I might want them to.
Okay, I will say, I have to take him at his word, and I believe that he thinks he's being honest, and he might. I'm not saying that in a condescending way. I actually give him an enormous amount of credit for admitting what he just said. And as somebody who went through a lot of that, I can understand it as well. And it takes a great deal of humility to come past that state that he was in prior, where even if God did exist, that was true to your conception, you would not want to worship that being. That comes from a lot of different things, but primarily pride. And it takes a great deal of humility to admit that is a nonsensical and wrong belief. And so I give him a lot of credit for that. But I don't know how much it's even right to be using this premise of non-resistant non-believers as a test of God's existence. Because, as I said before, maybe it's not about whether or not you want or don't want God to exist. Maybe it's about your preconception of who and what God is. Maybe that is wrong. And if that's the case, then it's not about whether or not you want or don't want God to exist. It's about whether or not your understanding of God is accurate. And that's it. And I think that is a much better premise to start from, than about whether, you make this argument of whether or not non-resistant non-believers exist, and if non-resistant non-believers exist, then God doesn't exist, because wouldn't he want you to know him even if you were a non-resistant non-believer? Maybe you don't have an emotional resistance to God, but you have a logical misconception. And that's it. And even on top of that, maybe that doesn't mean necessarily that you'll have a one-to-one direct experience with God that you perceive as such, even though, yes, you are constantly having experiences with God. All the things that happen in your life are an exchange between you and God, but whether you know that or not. And but if you don't have the proper understanding of who and what God is, then you won't see him. If you're a fish that doesn't know what water is, you will never see that water. You won't. Even if you can see the color red, but you don't know what red looks like, because nobody's ever explained it to you. And they showed you a banana that was yellow, and they were like, this is red. And you were like, okay. And then you went off and you passed a red rose, and you passed a red strawberry, and you passed a red fire truck, and you were looking for yellow bananas the whole time. You didn't see red. And it's not because you're resistant to the existence of red emotionally. It's because you don't know what red is. That's it. And, I think that that's a big part of this. So, let's see if there's any questions. What's up, Torin? Please hit the like button if you have been finding this, valuable. But I will say this, here. Let's get to this next clip.
Nothing more. My question to Jonathan, then, is simple. How can theism account for this lived experience? How can it account, in other words, for non-resistant non-belief? And if atheism, doesn't atheism, offer a better explanation at the very least? Am I a non-resistant non-believer? If so, what offers a best account, or a better account, of such a condition? A universe in which there is a loving God who does want to be my friend, but is for some reason refusing, or hiding, or toying with me? Or a universe without one? Or is there no such thing as a non-resistant non-believer, which is the only remaining option? Do we all secretly resist in some way or other? After desperately, in other words, trying to convince myself of God's existence for years and being left painfully unconvinced, will you just submit, as if to add insult to this spiritual injury, that this is in some way my fault? And if it is, then what could I have done differently? What should I be doing differently? What could I possibly have done differently given the course of my life? Now, assume for a moment, ladies and gentlemen, the alternative hypothesis of naturalism, of atheism, and ask if it provides a good account of non-resistant non-belief? And I think the answer is obvious. But it does get worse yet. You'll remember that my second fact that I said that I would bring up is the geographical predictability of religious belief.
So, here's what, it's funny because he says, for years I've tried to convince myself of the existence of God. It sounds like you have a misconception of what God is. If God exists, you have to assume that. I wonder if he's assumed that ever. That maybe his understanding of God is wrong. And that he should be seeking truth instead of trying to convince himself of the existence of God. Maybe he should be pursuing a different route. I can't tell you what is the best route, but I can tell you that the route that convinced me of the existence of God was not seeking God. It was me trying to understand what is the fundamental nature of existence and what is the fundamental structure of thought. That was that. That was enough to convince me of theism. And not even claiming any specific religion. And, he gets into this, he's like talking about, well, there's, he talks about the geographic distribution of atheism, of anti-theism versus theism. And, but I don't even think that he's looking at it correctly. He's saying that if you're Buddhist, you're not a theist. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't study Buddhism close enough. But if Buddhism claims that everything is conscious, then wouldn't existence itself be conscious? That fits my definition of theism. It might not be part of the Abrahamic tradition, but it would certainly make it theism. And so, I don't know. I'm not a Buddhist. I recently learned that the Chinese aren't atheists. There you go. Exactly. Buddhism, Taoism, Islam, Christianity, all in China alongside older folk religions. Yeah, exactly. There's Shintoism in Japan, and it's practiced right alongside and within Buddhism, and there's Christianity in Japan, and there's a lot of different theological traditions, as I call them, more so than religion. I don't think that they all fill the same role. But thought it was funny. There certainly are in here. Well, never mind. Oh, well, actually, let's just go on. Here, I'll show you.
Not only does theism need to account for non-resistant non-belief, but also for the fact that such belief is unequally present across the globe. Stephen Maitson has pointed out that the populace of Saudi Arabia is 95% Muslim and therefore 95% theistic, whereas the populace of Thailand is 95% Buddhist and therefore, at best, 5% theistic. How likely you are to be a theist, in other words, is intimately tied to the place in which you happen to be born. What can better explain this geographical spread? Theism or naturalism or atheism? Well, let's consider our two competing hypotheses. Could it be that God does exist, but that the Thai are simply naturally 20 times more likely to be resistant to belief in God than, say, the Saudis? Are they just naturally 20 times more stubborn or something?
What's funny is, first of all, there's a lot to break down with that. But for one, if Buddhism claims that existence is a sentient being, then that is theism. It's just a different theological tradition with a different focus and a different purpose than Christianity, which has a different purpose than Judaism, which has a different purpose than Islam, which has a different purpose than Hinduism. But if existence is sentient or is conscious, then that is theism, not atheism. But when he says, "Oh, are these people more stubborn or are these people less stubborn?" I mean, I'm Jewish. The majority of Jewish people are atheists, and I can tell you, we certainly are quite stubborn. But that doesn't necessarily mean, though, that that's the reason for the widespread description of atheism within that community or any community. Maybe it's because of the way that religion is taught in schools, or theism is taught in schools, compared to science as an alternative, where they're not seen as codependent, and in this part of the world. And I don't know, maybe the more educated in the Western public schools you become, the more anti-theistic you become. That probably would pan out if you looked at that demographic. There's so many things involved with this, and it's not. But he dismisses them as all being non-arguments, and at least one of them, which is that people are different. People are different. But not only are people different, the circumstances that they experience things are different. I can tell you that I was told that God exists in heaven, which is a place with clouds, and he is a man in the sky, and who made the world in 7 24-hour days the way that we understand them to be, and only 5,000 years ago. And, maybe that's not an accurate description of God. Maybe that's a childish description of God. Maybe people are told things about God, that he's all loving. I got into this, and I'm not saying he isn't, but maybe your understanding of what that would mean is wrong. And the thing is your understanding of what that would mean would by definition have to be incomplete, because you're not God. You can't know what it's like to be all loving. If God is all loving because he's God and you're not God, how can you know what it's like to be all loving? You can't know. All of these are not arguments that are good ones against the existence of God. And but I will say that it sounds like whatever conception of God Alex has, it's not accurate if God exists. If God exists. Because he would see him. As Jordan Peterson said, he would see him. If you had an accurate conception of God and God exists, you would see him. And Alex, I think, would have to admit that. That doesn't mean that you would necessarily have the experiences with him that you would want. I can tell you personally that I've received the silent treatment from God, and he has his reasons for that. I can presuppose and kind of assume certain reasons why. In certain circumstances it would be different, and like that is just my assumptions. But I can tell you that I have not received the silent treatment, and I have received the silent treatment. And I think that I've received both of those for multiple reasons. And but that's what happens when you deal with a sentient being. Sometimes you have a spouse and they give you the silent treatment. It's pretty rare that my wife actually gives me the silent treatment, but it's happened. It's happened a couple times. We're pretty good about talking, but a couple times. And, it's a sentient being. Can make choices. Can get angry. Can be, I don't know, all kinds of things. Maybe you're not asking the right questions. They don't know how to answer a question that's the wrong question. It's a bad question. It has no answer. Whatever question you're asking, maybe it has no answer. And if there is no answer to the question that you're asking, you're not going to get an answer. Like that I've certainly experienced. And so there's a lot to this. And but I don't think that these two arguments that he has made are good ones. But I think that my argument can account for both, which is that both experiences that are driving these two questions so far, which is that maybe you misunderstand what God is or who God is. And let's see. His final Right. Oh, I will say this real quick. You know, when he says naturalism is the same thing as atheism, that's not accurate. I don't think. What is naturalism? Let's look it up. Because I would say that the existence of God is natural. But you could also argue that his existence is supernatural. And I think both of those are correct depending on how you define natural. And you get to choose how you define it. There's two different ways which you can define it, and that's it. And you have to go from there and build from there, given a certain assumption about the definition of it. But you do have to choose between one of those two definitions of natural. And let's see, naturalism. Naturalism. In art and literature, a style and theory of representation based on the accurate depiction of detail. Okay, fair enough. In philosophical belief, it is that everything arises from natural properties and causes. Sounds a little self-referential to me. And supernatural or spiritual explanations are excluded or discounted. I think that this comes from a misunderstanding of what those things mean. You know, it's funny. Once somebody asked me, they said, "Do you believe in the supernatural?" This was on a Discord server. And I said, "It depends on what you mean by supernatural." And they said, "Stop playing with me. You're just trying to, confuse the issue. Do you believe in the supernatural or not?" And I said, there's two different possible definitions of the supernatural. And I will tell you whether or not I believe in the supernatural based on each of those definitions. And I said, if supernatural means that which is fake, which is how most people use it, then I don't believe in the supernatural. If supernatural means that which is beyond nature as we understand it, but is real, then I believe in it. And they were like, that just doesn't work. That doesn't work. It's like, but do you understand the problem here? Is that you can't tell me that the supernatural is that which is beyond nature, but nature is that which exists. And that if I believe, therefore, in the supernatural, therefore I believe in that which doesn't exist, and you just trap me into admitting that I'm a fool, I'm not going to do that. We have to get more specific about what supernatural means. If it means belief in that which exists beyond logical inevitabilities, I don't even think that exists. I think God's existence is a logical inevitability. If existence exists, then existence is all encompassing and therefore enclosed. And information in an enclosed system if existence would fundamentally have to be self-referential because it can't reference anything outside itself. You see what I'm saying? If there's information in existence and it's like a loop, it's just referencing itself, and it's totally referencing itself. If information is totally referencing within itself, the fundamental information within existence, that means it is entirely self-referencing. Do you know what it means to be entirely self-referencing? It means to be aware of oneself. That's what it means. So to me, and I don't know if I'm doing the best job explaining this, but it seems like self-awareness of existence, because we're presupposing the existence of information within existence because they kind of go hand in hand. There's certain logical constraints about existence in that it is all-encompassing and therefore is everything that exists but nothing outside of that, because nothing outside of that actually exists. And that means that the fundamental information of existence must be totally self-referential because it is within itself. Because there's nothing else to reference. There's nothing to inform about. Information must inform someone, too. There's so many logical reasons why it seems like existence must be self-aware. It seems natural to me. I don't know if I would even describe God as supernatural. Maybe you could. If you had a definition of God that made sense, or a definition of supernatural that made sense, not a definition of God. There's only one definition of God that makes sense, but you actually do have a choice in how you define supernatural. You don't have a choice in how you define God. You don't. Because God is kind of universally understood to be a sentient being. And if he's the highest or most fundamental sentient being, then he is sentient existence itself. Like, so that's the definition of God. You can, if you define God, you could, I guess, define God as not a sentient being, but if you define God as not a sentient being, then what's the point of using the term God? It's like the term becomes useless. You could use it, but like it's like, why? You could just use the term universe at that point. You know, or existence. Why use the term God? It kind of is understood by all to mean like it's a someone. God is a someone. It's the title of the someone that is the prime someone. And, you know, the fundamental someone, the all-encompassing someone, the initial someone, that's gone. It's always a someone. And if it's not, then it's like, why use the term? You've got so many other terms: existence, universe, nature. But, you know, I think that when you get down to it and you really examine existence and nature, it's like the nature of nature is sentience. You know, the nature of existence is sentience. But and it seems like you have to assume that. You know, getting back to like Curt Jaimungal's statement of like, maybe you can't prove God's existence to everybody, but you could prove it to yourself. I think that everybody could prove it to themselves, though. But that proof is universal. If you're honest and you ask yourself, what is the truest thing that I know? The answer for everyone is I am. So, you know, there's that. And so it's just interesting. It's like you're part of you can't present a math equation that is outside of you that everybody can kind of universally, you know, work out on a piece of paper. It's you have to present an equation that everybody, in order to see the truth in, they have to jump into the equation and be the equation. Be part of that equation at least. And if they're not willing to do that, then I mean, they're not thinking. The truest thing that they know is they exist. And if they don't know that, then I don't think that they're even sentient anymore. Like they are not. It's like, that's how fundamental this gets. It's like, you can just say, they are not. Just leave it at that. There is no they anymore. You know, if your answer is not I am to what is the truest thing that you know, you are not. There is no you. It's not. You can't even get fundamental enough to say you are not, because you can't even use the term you. There is no you. So it's like, that's as fundamental as you can get to describing it. You are not, but it's not even fundamental enough. It's fascinating, you know. And there is one more argument that he makes about suffering, and we'll get to it, but I just don't think that it's a good argument.
Then, the third fact of our universe, which is gratuitous suffering. Gratuitous here means something like unjustified or unwarranted or meaningless. I do this because it's easy to see how some instances of suffering may be beneficial in certain circumstances, or necessary to bring about some desirable state of affairs, some desirable end. But the existence of meaningless or unnecessary suffering does seem to be incompatible with the existence of a God who loves us and has the power to prevent it from happening. We're sometimes told that God has morally sufficient reason to allow suffering to exist. Indeed, if God is good, then he must have such sufficient reason. Perhaps suffering is necessitated by human free will. Perhaps suffering helps to develop a person's moral character, or maybe it's necessary to achieve some other end that God wishes to bring about. But intuitively, there appear to be instances of suffering that cannot serve any such end. And if even one example of these turns out to be an actual case of unnecessary or meaningless suffering, this would be enough to cause a problem. I want to propose something that might sound a little strange at first, which is that the biggest problem for theism here is not, famously, the great, intense sufferings of the world, like holocausts or earthquakes, but rather menial, less significant suffering, like being caught out in the rain, or stubbing your toe, or tripping over a curb on the street. Why? This seems a tad absurd, I'll grant you that, but consider this. When we experience a great suffering, like the death of a loved one, or a devastating earthquake, or indeed a holocaust, it's easy to imagine that this might somehow be part of a grand plan. The depth of our suffering may make us into better people. The people who die may be experiencing a much happier state of affairs in the afterlife now. Perhaps by allowing the Jewish Holocaust to take place, God makes it such that we are far less likely to allow even worse projects of genocide to occur in the future. But what could possibly be served? What possible end could be served? What possible meaning could there be in stubbing your toe, or tripping over a curb, or having a pigeon use your new suit as a restroom? Such instances are not significant. They're usually forgotten within a day or two, and therefore do not and cannot develop the soul. Nor do they seem plausibly part of some grand design or plan. They seem, that is to say, meaningless and unnecessary. More meaninglessness than instances of, let's say, great or intense suffering. Much more.
Okay, well, I want to get into this a bit because this is fascinating. This is final argument. I became a father recently, about 3 months ago, to a adorable little daughter. We have been, when you have a baby, you give them what's called tummy time. You put them on their stomach and they have to learn to lift their head up and look around, and it's kind of painful probably. It's like exercising a lot. It's not the most pleasant experience. It's quite an exercise for them. And, I watched her experience pain for the first time, other than maybe birth. Maybe birth was painful, but, I've seen her since then experience pain for the first time, a couple, just like, I remember once, and I'm just being honest, I was looking at something on my phone and I was holding her and I dropped my phone and it hit her in the nose, and, it was from a few inches, but like you could tell that it hurt, and I felt horrible. But she was fine. I dropped my phone from like a couple inches, but she was like a week old, like so small. And, she just was so shocked by it. And then she was just like, like starts crying. And I felt horrible, but I'm not saying God drops his phone on your face, but I'm just saying like, it's just, I remember thinking when I saw this, I was like, this is the first time that she's really experienced pain outside of birth, which I think birth is quite a painful process actually, for babies. A lot of the time, I think it's quite painful. But now, I see her when I put her on tummy time and we like let her, exercise and stuff. She experiences discomfort. It's like being caught in the rain. It's cold. It's not comfortable. And, she's straining, but she's building muscle at the same time. She's building the strength to look around and to stand and to crawl. And it's a necessary thing. It's not an unnecessary thing. She might not realize, though, and I bet you she doesn't realize, that it's a necessary bit of suffering that she has to go through. Not having phones dropped on her face, but being, placed onto her stomach and building muscle. And, all of these, this argument that he's making of like, this suffering seems like it could matter. Cancer, genocides, whatever, torture. But this suffering, being caught in the rain, stubbing your toe, that doesn't matter at all. It seems meaningless. Okay, well, it seems meaningless doesn't mean it is meaningless. You're not God. And also, it could be that you are bringing it on yourself. I don't know if this is an accurate, statement to make for those of you who are self-described atheists and actually, anti-theists out there, which that's not a judgmental statement. It's just a description. Like I've been there. There's nothing, I don't, there's, you can't be mad at somebody for not believing in God. You want people to be honest. If you don't see God, be honest about it. If you do see God, be honest about it. That's all that we should ask of each other is honesty. And nothing more, honesty and kindness, I think, is two things that you have to ask of each other. But and grace, I guess, which if I think honesty and kindness lead to grace, because if you're honest about your own faults and your own beingness and you're kind, then you end up that leads to inevitably grace. But that's all we can ask of each other is honesty and kindness, which is grace. And but not we don't want dishonesty, and he says later, I think it's a tall order to ask people who don't believe in a religion to follow it. I think that's true too. I don't think you should follow a religion that you don't believe in. It's funny. I know a Hasidic rabbi who was an atheist or an anti-theist, but a self-described atheist who was Hasidic. He grew up Hasidic, and he became a rabbi eventually but he became a theist before that, and in his 20s, and he told me that he was like, yeah, I wanted to continue, my way of life because I liked it, I liked my path. I liked that, you're gonna be in a specific community. I liked being part of that community. I liked, the benefits of being part of that community. And then he became a theist, but he was honest with me about that. And I thought that was interesting but he that's not really following a religion. It's following a community. It's being part of a community's culture. If you're honest about the fact that you don't see God, but you want to participate in rituals, that's fine. That's just being part of a community. You can see the benefit of rituals without thinking that they're for God. But that's why I'm saying is that I don't even know if it's like we shouldn't use the term religion because we don't know what that means. But I think that what's more important to say, and a better way to say it, is that we should expect everybody to be honest about what they believe and kind, and that's it. And we should give each other grace for doing so. Otherwise, it's hard to expect people to be like honest and kind if you're not going to give them grace. It's a cycle that's important to not break, and it's very easy to break it. I think that it's important to not assume that you know more than God. You can't. If you're all knowing, then you know whether or not suffering is meaningful or not. Is my point. No matter how menial it seems, or meaningless it seems, or profound it seems, and how how strong that suffering is, how momentary, how dragged out, it doesn't matter. You don't know because you're not God. And that's why it comes down to what I was saying before. Is like you have to try and you have to try and understand what is the nature of reality. And maybe you'll get God. I think that you will get God if you do it properly. But you shouldn't be trying to convince yourself of God's existence. If you don't see God already, you're trying to convince yourself of a God that doesn't exist. If God does exist, you would see him if your definition was correct. You're trying to convince yourself of a false perception. And I don't know. I think that his arguments that he presents are not the right ones. I think that they are all very easily seen in the right context as the wrong arguments. And, I hope he does find God one day. I really do. I think that it takes a lot to admit that you would want to know God if God existed. I think that that's quite a bit of this way there. That's, you're getting to that humble place that you have to get to. The most important thing in the path to understanding is humility. That is the most important thing. And, when on his website, on Alex's website, it says question everything. I agree with that. But you have to question humbly. And as humble as certain statements that he's made, it's not humble to... How can you claim that it's humble to know whether or not certain acts of suffering are meaningful or not? You don't know. You're like my daughter compared to God. You have no idea why you're being placed onto your stomach and made to suffer through lifting your head up. But I know, as her father, I know why we're doing that, and I know that it's necessary, and I know that if I didn't put her through that, she would end up a gelatinous blob, who cannot do anything for herself. And I don't want that for her. And I don't think God wants that for us. I don't know if that's what for sure, but I would assume, but that's not even that's not enough, to start examining the existence of God, but it is enough to start examining the assistance of God. As I stated before, I don't have faith in God's existence. I'm aware of his existence. I have faith in God's assistance. Because I have to. Because he's sovereign and beyond me and knows more than me. And there's no way that I'll know more than him. So I don't know what it's like to be what it means to be all loving. I don't have the context that he has. I don't know what it's like for something to be meaningless or meaningful. I don't have for some moment in life to be meaningless or meaningful. I don't have the context that he has. And that's why you have to have faith in God's assistance. But I think that you can know, or not even know, I think you can be aware of his existence. We have 8 viewers and only 6 likes. If you have found this meaningful, please hit the like button. Please comment in the comment section. It really helps fuel the algorithm. I will get to the questions now. Moments, rather continuous awareness. Each moment represents an individual mind state, such as thought, memory, feeling, or perception. Yes, that's true. But it's a superposition, It's also it's a chain of individual links, but it's also a chain. But yeah, Alex's arguments are insufferably wrong, maliciously and or ignorantly. I don't think that they're malicious. I think that they are ignorant, and I say that not in a judgmental way. Like, I say that as in, like, he's just starting from the wrong premise because he's been told what God is by other people, and he doesn't see God in his life according to his interpretations of those descriptions, and he's being honest about it, and he should be. But I think that there's better arguments for God's existence, and I think that his arguments for the lack of existence of God are not good arguments at all. Imagine how boring life would be without stubbed toes and even mosquitoes. I don't know, man. I could do without mosquitoes, to be quite honest. Like, I think life, if we just were missing mosquitoes and ticks, and tapeworms. If God could get rid of anything, if I could ask God to get rid of anything, I would ask him to get rid of mosquitoes and tapeworms and ticks. But I'm not God, so I don't see what he sees. And it seems like he sees that those things are meaningful. I don't like them. And that's why I don't want them around. But it's because I don't like them, and I'm being honest. But I have to assume that they are meaningful, and that there's meaning to their existence that is just beyond me. and beyond my understanding. I have to assume that because I'm not God. That's the humble answer to that. Even though I will admit, I love animals. Like, I find even spiders that creep me out and scare me fascinating. And centipedes. Have you ever seen a centipede? I've had centipedes crawl under my bed while I was in bed at night when I was living in Arizona. I saw a centipede crawl from the wall under my bed, and I can't tell you how terrified you are as a little kid to get out of your bed and run from your bed, or to stay in your bed. You don't know what to do. It's terrifying. I still find those creatures amazing. I don't like ticks and tapeworms and mosquitoes at all. I would not mind if they were gone, but I'm not God, and they clearly are here for a reason if God made them. And I have to assume that. I don't know what the reason is, but I have to assume it. But I will admit, humbly, I don't like them at all. But I don't like stub toes either. But yeah, I think life would be pretty amazing still without any of those things. But there's a reason for them, I have to assume. Because I have to have faith in God's assistance. And, I appreciate the winters here in Vermont with the lack of mosquitoes. I totally understand that. I appreciate the lack of parasites, yeah. Your sapphire goody tarantula is getting huge. That's cool. Sapphire goody tarantulas. I'm reading the chat, by the way, for those of you that don't know, but Torrin in the chat has a sapphire goody tarantula. Look up what that is. It's an amazing... I'll just look it up. It's an amazing tarantula. It's actually, I think it's medically significant if you get bitten by it. Most tarantulas are not. Sapphire goot. Tarantula. That's pretty amazing looking. We'll just show a picture of what he's talking about. Dang. Pretty amazing. But don't get bit. I've heard it's not fun. And I know they bite. Most tarantulas don't bite much, but that's one of those ones that will, from what I've heard. I want to wrap up with one final statement. Or, you know what? Two more clips.
I'm only like... Assuming that theism is false offers a better account of it than assuming that theism is true. Assume atheism. Assume that human beings and other animals are nothing more than evolved creatures who developed pain receptors to make them more prone to avoiding the menial and great sufferings that upset our survival prospects. On this account, the existence of all suffering, small and great, is not only explained, but expected. Thus, atheism offers a better account, in my view, than theism of three crucial and unavoidable facts: divine hiddenness, geographical religious statistics, and the existence of gratuitous human and non-human suffering. And I am truly excited to hear how Jonathan might account for these.
Okay, so he thinks sapphire goody tarantulas are either evolved or they are, the product of a theological, of a theistic cosmos, I guess. And I am somebody who has an extensive background in biology and zoology and ecology. If you know, that's how I know what a sapphire goody tarantula is, that was referenced in the chat. And I work with captive animals, specifically reptiles, and have my entire life, and worked with them in the wild with biologists my entire life. I've always believed in evolution as or in natural selection, or in selection, I guess. But the question is that what is the definition of these words? Because I remember once, and I've told this before, my now wife, when we were just started dating, I told her, I was like, so wait, she was a Christian and is a Christian. And I had asked her, I said, do you believe God created the universe? Or do you believe that, there's evolution and that animals evolve? As if they were mutually exclusive. And she said both. And I stepped back and I realized I had never, ever entertained the idea honestly that both of those things were not mutually exclusive. And as I've said before, sometimes it takes a pretty girl to get a man to realize that he should question his beliefs on certain things. It was, I truly was hit by it. I was like, wow, I guess those aren't mutually exclusive ideas. They're not. God could have created the universe, and that universe might be extremely constrained by certain constraints that he has, which this is what my work suggests, that lead to an unfolding of the universe a specific way. But within that, there are also choices that can be made. Just like, there is a specific amount of ways to get from here to there, and you can make choices on certain ways. If you're going from here to Chick-fil-A or something, there's certain finite number of routes that you could take if you're not going to go backwards and go past it. There's a finite number of routes that you could take. If you're going to, we're speaking practically here. And, but there are choices, within that. And, they're not, the existence of selection and logical constraints on that selection are not a mutually exclusive concept to theism. I think that they actually emerge naturally from theism. And that's a discussion for another stream, but my work with sentient singularity theory, if you follow it, then you know that this is built into that. But it would just get too long for this, and I have more streams specifically on that kind of concept coming. But if there are constraints to the nature and structure of existence, then there are constraints to the logic of the generative structure of nature. And so, that's just that. But I don't think that I think that the framing of this is wrong. He says earlier, that he says that accidental existence. Who's accident? You can't even mention the term accident without it being still at the hands of a sentient being. I get it. I get what you're trying to say, but you can't even actually say it if you really examine what that means. An accident. What is an accident? Let's look it up. An incident that happens unexpectedly or unintentionally is really what he's talking about. It's not about being expected or unexpected. I don't think, if you have all the information, no matter whether it's a theistic universe or whether or not it's a anti-theistic universe, whether there's God or no God, especially if there's no God, there's no such thing as unexpected. Really, like, you just don't have all the information. But unintentional, it's like, I guess you could use the term unintentionally, but it means that it's like an action of somebody, but it's still unintentional, is usually what we mean by accident when we use it but we don't say, like, lightning striking over there was an accident. We might say somebody getting hit by lightning was an accident, but, like, it's still in the context of somebody. It's just, I don't know. It's these terms are not built for this. There are terms that must be used differently in the context of sentience versus in the context of non-sentience, and just like structure. But even then, those structures don't exist outside of the context of sentience. Joscha Bach talks about this a lot. He says that, outside of theological traditions, we don't have the terminology to discuss fundamental reality. I think he's right. Or at least consciousness, obviously. We don't have I would say fundamental reality. I don't know if he said that exactly, but he said, outside of theological traditions, we don't have the terminology to discuss consciousness, basically. Or at least the conscious agents within existence, beyond humans. I've done streams on it. But, here, final statement. And then I'll wrap up with this.
In other words, I'm not arguing that theism can offer no account of these kinds of situations and sufferings, though I am skeptical that it can. I'm only arguing that assuming that theism is false offers a better account of it than assuming that theism is true. Assume atheism. Assume that human beings and other animals are nothing more than evolved creatures who developed pain receptors to make them more prone to avoiding the menial and great sufferings that upset our survival prospects. On this account, the existence of all suffering, small and great, is not only explained, but expected. Thus, atheism offers a better account, in my view, than theism of three crucial and unavoidable facts: divine hiddenness, geographical religious statistics, and the existence of gratuitous human and non-human suffering. And I am truly excited to hear how Jonathan might account for these on theism, in defending it as a more plausible account of our reality. Thank you.
Well, I will just say that I think that his answer says exactly what I have been stating, is that atheism, and how it actually manifests, is actually anti-theism. And if we're going to start understanding this stuff, we have to have more accurate terminology and more accurate so that we can have more accurate definitions and descriptions about our experiences. He is an anti-theist. It's not a judgmental statement. It means he disbelieves in the sentience of God, or the sentience of existence. That's what it would mean to be an anti-theist. I think that he needs to think about it more, but not in terms of, is God all-loving? I've had people say that to me in debate. Would you say that God is love? It's like, what do you mean? You don't even know necessarily what love is, as much as God would, if God exists. Then God understands love better than you. Why, you're using love to try and understand God fundamentally. Maybe non-fundamentally you can use that, but first you have to come to an understanding of whether or not God exists. You can't use love as a premise of whether or not God to start talking about whether or not God exists. You need to go and figure out what is the nature of existence that you must assume to be true first, more than anything. And start from there. What is the nature of existence? What is the structure of existence? What does the definition of existence imply about existence? And what is the truest thing that you know? And start from there. And see where it leads you. With that, I think I'm going to call it. Torn asked a final question. How has your hobby changed now that you are a father? Did you downsize or change anything? I am still trying to become better at managing my time after becoming a father. I will say that has been difficult because you're not on your schedule anymore as much. Like, you're on your schedule until like your baby needs you for something, and then you're on their schedule. And I said this after my newborn was born, after our baby was born. I said, I used to say, we make plans and God laughs. And now I say, we make plans, God laughs, and the baby laughs. And so that's what I will say. That has impacted everything from this to my other every hobby that I have to everything, work. But it's worth it. It is worth it. I mean, that little girl is so cute. And it's very worth it, but it does, cause you to have to, it causes disruptions in your schedule. It takes up time and energy, but no, I haven't really downsized my hobbies or anything like that, but I've had to just, I've had less free time to just not devote to things. I don't have that, many animals to where I can't take care of them but I mean, I will, you guys know I missed a stream last week. I had, some stuff I had to take care of. And so, but I've still been pretty consistent about the streams, but it's definitely something that I'm, working on getting on a more normal schedule. Like we started so late today. That's because partially I have a baby, but I will eventually, as she gets on more of a schedule, get everything else on more of a schedule again. So it's not that I've stopped, everything else that I want to do in my life, but it is definitely that I've had to make scheduling adjustments. So, but with that, thank you everybody. Please hit the like button if you found this valuable. Comment what your thoughts are below the video, and share this with anybody who you think would also find it valuable. But I really appreciate everybody, and I'm grateful for everyone's grace as I have had to adjust schedules, but we will continue this project. So, and I'm grateful to Alex O'Connor for sharing his thoughts and putting them out there. Link to his talk is below. I will post the link to Curt Jaimungal's discussion with Jordan Peterson where I was quoted, and I will also post the link to Curt Jaimungal's interview by Jesse Michels below as well, where Curt talked about the hiddenness of God, and grateful to anybody who puts their thoughts out there, including Alex, even though I don't think that his arguments are very good ones. But thank you. Peace.